The year is 1938. Somewhere high in the Himalayas, two guards patrol the perimeter of a secret Nazi military base. Bored, freezing, and lethargic, one guard decides to smoke a cigarette while his companion remains bundled against the icy mountain wind. The sound of approaching engines arrests their attention, and the guards notice a twin-engine bomber approaching the base. But it's not one of theirs. The aircraft releases its payload, a cylindrical-shaped container that looks like a bomb, and stamped with the name Tesla Heavy Industries. Before base security can raise the alarm, impact. Inside the secret base, minions of the Third Reich are caught off guard. Something, or someone, has arrived unannounced. The capsule bursts through the walls of the base and comes to a crashing halt inside the command center. Troops scramble to surround the capsule, rifles at the ready. One brave trooper dares approach the smoldering object and identifies what looks like a hatch, but before he can finish his sentence, from out of the hollow mouth of the capsule emerges a walking, talking robot with glowing blue eyes and dressed in a U.S. Army uniform. Thus begins the first issue of the world's greatest science adventure magazine, Atomic Robo, The Will to Power. I love Atomic Robo. In a time of reboots, resets, multiverse implosions, and character assassinations, this book truly is a hidden gem. Which is why I'm constantly appalled by the fact that it doesn't seem to get the attention it deserves. That's why I decided to make this video. Full disclaimer, I'm not in any way, shape, or form involved with Atomic Robo's creative team. I'm just a fan making a video. Atomic Robo is everything I love about comics, and pop culture in general. It's Indiana Jones, Ghostbusters, Back to the Future, and The Rocketeer all in one comic. And it's chock full of shoutouts to other pop culture favorites like Star Trek, Star Wars, Power Rangers, the Cthulhu mythos, spaghetti westerns, and I'm not even including the plethora of history Robo inherits from spiritual successors like Doc Savage, The Shadow, Buck Rogers, Dick Tracy, Captain America, Iron Man, and, well, you get the idea. And somehow writer Brian Clevenger, one of the co-creators, makes the old stuff feel new and fresh. One of the ways he does this is by writing a nuclear-powered robot as if he's just an average Joe who happens to be extremely long-lived. In the second issue, present-day Robo is being interviewed by a reporter while they're walking through a park. We learn Robo is 83 years old, that he's been to the moon, to Mars, and Hollow Earth, and he's a veteran of 3 wars. On top of that, he's saved the world numerous times from many vague and unspecified threats. Then the reporter asks him what the hardest part of his life is. The story cuts to a flashback. 3 days earlier, Robo is at Tesladyne headquarters, where he's informed that Reno is in danger of being destroyed by a stampede of giant ants, which is a staple of classic 1950s sci-fi. I mean, let's face it, giant bugs are to sci-fi what zombies are to horror. In a moment of meta-commentary, Robo remarks that giant ants are impossible, because gravity would crush them. Tell me you live in a comic book universe without telling me you live in a comic book universe. Giant bugs, you say? Yes, that sounds about right. He's interrupted when one of his employees brings him a package. Inside an envelope is a letter and an old black and white photograph of Robo. We then get a flashback. Within the flashback, Robo is flying a plane over China in 1940 and he's taking fire. And that's all we get. Robo returns his attention to the matter of the giant ants, again remarking on the impossibility of giant ants being a real thing. He stuffs the letter in his pocket and hops on a helicopter to go stop the ants from destroying Reno. On the next page, we get even more meta-commentary from the characters Lang and Vic, 2 of Robo's action scientist colleagues. Vic is worried the ants might have eye beams because, well, they're giant ants. They must shoot beams of some kind from their eyes. Then Vic touts the classic sci-fi theory that radiation mutated the bugs, causing them to grow to giant size. Lang remarks that radiation doesn't work like that, to which Vic replies, "But what about imaginary radiation?" Emphasis on the word imaginary. It's not apparent yet, but Robo's universe is part alternate history and part metafictional. The earliest stories are full of self-referential dialogue like this, where the characters remark on the absurdity of their world and circumstances. I typically don't like this kind of writing because these things being talked about in story are only absurd to the reader. If we lived in a science fictional universe where giant bugs and alien invasions were real possibilities, then those things would be part of the norm. They'd be mundane. I also didn't used to like metafiction much either, although my opinion on it has changed over the years. When metafiction is done right, it can be very entertaining and philosophically intriguing, but that's a discussion for another video. Brian Clevenger uses in-story commentary like this to great effect in Atomic Robo. It's a fun, fanciful, and funny comic that doesn't take itself too seriously. There's plenty of action, clever dialogue, and lots of world building in later issues. While Vic and Lang continue to verbally spar over the obviously made-up field of imaginary physics, Robo grabs his rifle and jumps, Captain America style, out of the helicopter. We flash back again to 1940, where Robo is still in a dogfight with a Japanese fighter plane. Robo is out of ammo, and the enemy keeps bearing down on him. Fed up and unable to outrun him, Robo punches out the canopy, stands up, and shoots the enemy pilot with his service revolver. Unfortunately, Robo's victory looks pointless as his own plane hurtles towards the ground. Back in the present, Robo falls and crushes the head of one ant and then proceeds to tangle with the other. Meanwhile, Vic, Lang, and a third action scientist named Bernard continue throwing out theories that might explain how the ants grew so large. Lo and behold, the ant is tough enough to withstand gunfire. So what does Robo do? He starts throwing Buicks, claiming automobiles have been the best melee weapons to use against giant monsters since the 50s. Jenkins, who's piloting the helicopter, convinces Robo to keep the property damage to a minimum, and so he resorts to ripping the ant's head off with his bare hands. The others he attacks with a postal service mailbox and a street sign, all while trying to think up puns. Because one must find humor in life after all. Eventually, Robo manages to squish, smash, and melee the remaining bugs and saves Reno. Reporters are there snapping photos, and Robo squints, seemingly annoyed by the excessive camera flashes. And then we get our last flashback to 1940 on the next page. It turns out Robo was flying his army buddy's patrol because he was too drunk to fly. After Robo manages to land, he snaps a picture to commemorate the moment. It's the same black and white photograph that came with the letter Robo received in the present. In his office at Tesladyne, Robo sits at his desk and composes a letter, surrounded by trophies and memorabilia from his past adventures. We get to read the whole letter in the final panel. A woman named Gracie Simmons has written Robo to inform him of the passing of her grandfather, Charlie, Robo's army buddy from the flashback. Charlie has finally passed away from a long battle with cancer, and Gracie found the photograph of Robo among her grandfather's belongings. The phone rings while Robo reminisces, and Vic informs Robo that something weird is happening in Egypt. Donning a utility vest, Robo marches off to confront another threat. On the next page, we read the letter Robo has written to Gracie Simmons. It's full of warmth and good humor, and Robo closes the letter with the following. Charlie was a good soldier and a good man. I'm proud to have called him a friend, and will miss him greatly. We flash forward again to the present, and Robo answers the reporter's question. What's the hardest part about being Atomic Robo? The hardest part is that I'm 83 years old. I do a great Jack Benny, but no one really gets it anymore. For those who don't know, Jack Benny was a famous comedian best remembered for the Jack Benny program, which ran on CBS from 1950 to 1965. He was an extremely popular entertainer with a long career in radio and television, and was a household name in the United States for decades. Show of hands, who knew who Jack Benny was? Anyone? And that's the point Brian Clevenger is trying to make. Robo is functionally immortal, and Clevenger uses this to establish pathos with the reader. The first issue is a straightforward adventure story that establishes the basics, and so is the second issue to a degree, but underneath is a subplot that establishes Robo as a tragic hero, one who's doomed to outlive his closest friends and loved ones. Like other immortal hero characters, he's a man out of time, forever apart, and it's not just because he's a machine. Robo's struggles with loneliness are eventually fleshed out in later stories, but this second issue subtly reveals an undercurrent of real sadness in an otherwise lighthearted comic book. And that's Atomic Robo in a nutshell. It's a series with lots of heart, which I'm sad to say is severely lacking in most mainstream comics today. I discovered Atomic Robo in 2015, when the Secret Wars event was going on with Marvel. I was at a point where I'd really fallen out of love with comics. Like a lot of fans, I wasn't happy with DC's New 52, and for some reason Secret Wars just wasn't doing it for me. It seemed like all the ingredients were there for a great epic, but the whole crossover event was just too bloated and there was too much going on that didn't matter. I was desperate for something new that wasn't Marvel or DC, but was generally similar to both. And Atomic Robo fit the bill. It was exactly what I was looking for. I remember going back to the comic book store and buying a new volume every week until I was all caught up. I just couldn't get enough. There was one thing I couldn't decide on, though, and that was whether I liked the art or not. I'm more of a story-oriented reader when it comes to comics. The art is usually secondary for me, but Scott Wegener's style is more cartoony than what I'm used to seeing in a superhero comic book, and I think that's on purpose. Atomic Robo is a very family-friendly comic book. I think that's why it appeals to me so much. There's almost no profanity. Robo uses the word applesauce as an expletive, for crying out loud. The art is never risque. The colors are usually very bright and vivid. And even though there is violence, it's not really bloody or gory. It's a very wholesome product. You can give your 6-year-old an Atomic Robo comic and not have to worry about them stumbling onto a sex scene like the one we got between Batman and Catwoman back in the early days of the New 52. You know the one I'm talking about. Some of the art definitely puts me in mind of Mike Mignola's work. Sometimes there's not much to the background of a scene, and the way in which Wegner draws human faces reminds me of the artwork from Hellboy. But where Hellboy is grim, dark, and depressing, Robo is like a Saturday morning cartoon, and again, I think that's the aesthetic he and Clevenger are going for. I particularly like the way Wegner uses Robo's eyes to express his emotions. Robo doesn't have a mouth, so he can't frown or smile in the conventional sense. He can, however, squint a million different ways that are just as effective at conveying emotions like sadness, anger, excitement, surprise, and even pain. Robo is up to 15 trade paperback volumes at this point. That's not bad for an independent comic that started back in 2007. And it doesn't look like Clevenger and Wegner are planning to end Robo's adventures anytime soon. The comic went web-based back in 2015, so you can read every issue on the official Atomic Robo website, including the newest ones. I'll put the link in the description. IDW publishes the trades, which is still my preferred way to read comics, because I don't mind paying for the good stuff. I'll wrap up this video by saying I'd like to see this book get more attention because it really deserves it. If you're a comic book fan but you're tired of Marvel and DC, try giving Atomic Robo a read. It's got all the old tropes, but they're polished to a high shine, and there's plenty of character development and world building to make it stand apart from mainstream books. I only meant for this to be an introductory essay, so I haven't even covered a fraction of what you'll find. Maybe if I get enough feedback from this video, I'll make more in-depth essays on Robo, so don't be shy. Smash that like button and leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching.